He was remembered as the man who looked impossible to kill. Shirtless, bleeding, crawling across stages like his own body was something he wanted to escape. He threw himself into crowds. He smeared peanut butter across his chest. He helped turn broken glass, noise, and danger into part of rock history. But before all that, he was a clean-cut kid from Michigan. He was born in Muskegon and raised near Ypsilanti, the only child of working parents who lived in a tiny trailer. Then the story bent into something nobody could have predicted. His band helped invent punk before punk had a name. Their first records barely sold. The music failed before it became sacred. Drugs tore the band apart. David Bowie helped pull him into another life. And decades later, almost everyone from the original Stooges lineup was gone. The trailer is real. The failed albums are real. The Bowie rescue is real. The Rock Hall honor is real. This is the real story of Iggy Pop. Stay until the end, because the strangest part of Iggy Pop's story is not the peanut butter, the broken glass, the Bowie rescue, or the records that failed before they became sacred. It is what was sitting in a tiny trailer bedroom before all of it began. Chapter 1. The Good Boy in the Trailer Park. Before he became Iggy Pop, he was James Newell Osterberg Jr., born on April 21, 1947, in Muskegon, Michigan. That is the first contradiction. The man who later crawled across stages, bled in front of strangers, and made danger part of the performance, did not start as some runaway punk myth. He was an only child from Michigan. His father, James Osterberg Sr., taught English. His mother, Luella Osterberg, worked in a manufacturing plant. The family lived near Ypsilanti, in a small trailer where every inch mattered. Then came the first object that explains the story: a drum kit. He started with rubber pads glued to plywood. But once drumming took over, his parents made a serious choice. They gave up their own bedroom so his three-piece kit would fit. At Ann Arbor High School, he joined the Iguanas in 1963, and that band gave him the nickname that followed him forever: Iggy. Even behind the drums, he wanted to be seen. He built a 7-foot riser for his kit, turning the drummer into the tallest figure on stage. After that came the University of Michigan, the Prime Movers, a move to Chicago, and time playing with blues harmonica player Big Walter Horton. The first version of Iggy Pop was not chaos. He was a disciplined drummer with ambition, blues training, and a body already looking for a bigger role. Then he came back from Chicago, and skill was no longer enough. He wanted something uglier. Chapter 2. The Band That Invented Trouble. When Iggy Pop returned to Ann Arbor, he was not looking for another polite band. He had played drums, studied blues, and spent time in Chicago with Big Walter Horton. That mattered. He was not just a wild body looking for noise. He had learned timing, feel, and restraint from music that did not waste a note. Now he wanted the opposite of restraint. In 1967, that hunger became the Psychedelic Stooges. The lineup was simple: Iggy Pop on vocals, Ron Asheton on guitar, Scott Asheton on drums, and Dave Alexander on bass. They came out of Ann Arbor, but they did not sound like a careful college town band. They sounded blunt, ugly, and half-built on purpose, like someone had ripped the decoration off rock music and left only the nerve. One moment helped unlock the frontman. That same year, Iggy saw Jim Morrison and the Doors perform in Ann Arbor. What he took from it was not a costume. It was permission. A singer did not have to stand still. A singer did not have to act grateful. A singer could make the crowd feel like something might go wrong. So Iggy stopped treating the microphone like a job. He treated it like a dare. That was the real rise of the Stooges. It was not a clean climb through hit singles and screaming fans. It was a band discovering that being wrong for the room could become the whole point. Their songs were primitive. Their image was strange. Their frontman looked less like a polished star than a man testing what an audience would tolerate. Their first public gig came in 1968 at the Grande Ballroom in Detroit, a room already tied to loud guitars and underground rock. Soon after, they signed with Elektra Records. On paper, that was the break. A strange young band from Michigan had landed on a major label. The same company that had the Doors now had the Stooges. From the outside, it could have looked like the start of a normal career. It was not. The Stooges were too raw to behave like a normal investment. They did not arrive with radio-friendly polish. They did not soften themselves into something easier to package. Where other bands wanted to impress people, the Stooges wanted to hit a nerve. That made them hard to sell. It also made them dangerous to ignore. The rise was real, but it came with a warning label. The band had a record deal, a terrifying frontman, and a sound that seemed to understand punk before the word had a home. The problem was that almost nobody knew what to do with them yet. The record deal gave them a chance. It also gave their chaos a microphone. Chapter 3. The albums nobody bought until everyone copied them. In 1969, the Stooges released their first album, The Stooges, produced by John Cale of the Velvet Underground. That producer credit mattered. John Cale came from a band that already understood how ugly, repetitive, and strange rock music could be. But even with that connection, the Stooges did not sound like a clean next step from the 60s. They sounded like someone had shut the door on Flower Power and left 4 bored, angry men in the room. The record had I Wanna Be Your Dog and 1969.
And now I wanna be your dog, as always, and it's always this way.
Songs that would later sound like early punk scripture. But in the moment, they were too blunt for a mass audience. There was no grand poetry hiding the boredom, no fancy solo trying to prove musicianship, just a riff, a pulse, and Iggy Pop sounding like he had already run out of patience with the world. The album did not make them stars. That became the pattern. The band was building a language other people would later use. But when the Stooges first spoke it, the room barely understood them. The influence came late. The reward did not. Then came Funhouse in 1970, produced by Don Gallucci. If the first album sounded like a warning, Funhouse sounded like the warning had kicked the door open. The record was built around the feeling of a band playing with almost no distance between the song and the breakdown. Down on the Street did not ease you in. TVI sounded wired and predatory. By the time LA Blues arrived, the whole album felt like it had stopped pretending to be civilized. Again, the legend came later. At the time, those records did not give the band protection. No hit single changed their lives. No big commercial safety net arrived. No clean path opened in front of them. They were making records that later generations would treat like blueprints, but in real time, they were still a difficult band with bad odds and worsening pressure. So the live show became the thing people talked about. And that is where the story gets dangerous, because the audience did not need to understand Funhouse to remember Iggy. At the Cincinnati Pop Festival in 1970, he smeared peanut butter across his chest and threw it into the crowd. It was ridiculous. It was ugly. It was funny. It was also perfect television for a culture that still did not know what to do with him. A song could be ignored. A body covered in peanut butter could not. That image attached itself to him because it solved a problem the music had created. The records were ahead of their time, but the spectacle landed immediately. People could forget chart positions. They could forget reviews. They could forget the name of the album. They did not forget that. But there was a cost. Once the body became the headline, the band underneath it became easier to miss. The Stooges were not just a freak show with guitars. They were writing the grammar for a kind of rock that would not fully arrive until later. That is the cruel part. They were early enough to matter. They were too early to be saved by it. And once the spectacle became bigger than the band's stability, the cracks stopped being hidden. They moved into the lineup, into the record label, and into the next album that should have rescued them. It did not. Chapter 4. The Night the Stooges Died on Stage. The fall did not happen all at once. It came in pieces. In 1970, Dave Alexander was fired after showing up too drunk to perform. That was not a small crack. He was part of the original lineup, the bassist in the band that had just made the Stooges and Funhouse, and now the first version of the group was already losing parts of itself. Then the damage spread. By 1971, drug use and conflict had torn through the band badly enough that Elektra Records dropped them. Think about that timing. The band had released 2 records that would later become sacred to punk and underground rock. But in the moment, those records did not protect them. No hit single came to rescue them. No major commercial wave arrived to hold the lineup together. For most bands, that would have been the ending. For Iggy Pop, it became another bad doorway. The group returned as Iggy and the Stooges, but it was not the same machine. James Williamson came in on lead guitar. Ron Asheton, whose guitar had helped define the band's original sound, moved to bass. That change matters because it shows how unstable the whole thing had become. The band was still alive, but its bones had been rearranged. Near this damaged second version stood David Bowie. Bowie mixed the record that should have made them impossible to ignore. That album was Raw Power, released in 1973. The title was not subtle because the record was not subtle. Search and Destroy sounded like a man introducing himself as a weapon. Gimme Danger slowed the threat down until it felt personal. Raw Power turned the whole idea into a command. I need. Somebody let the need show through the noise. On paper, this should have been the correction. They had a harder guitar attack. They had Bowie's name attached. They had songs that would later become some of the most important records in the whole Stooges story. Still, Raw Power did not save them. That is the brutal part. Today, the album sounds like prophecy. At the time, it was another warning that arrived before the public was ready to hear it. The band had helped invent the future, but the future was not paying rent, keeping people sober, or keeping the crowd on their side. By 1974, the end arrived in Detroit, at the Michigan Palace. This was not a farewell show wrapped in nostalgia. It was a public wreck. Iggy antagonized the crowd, and the crowd answered. Beer came flying. Whiskey bottles came flying. Bras and shoes came flying. The band kept playing while the room turned against them, and the night became less like a concert than a fight nobody had bothered to stop. That show later became part of Metallic KO, released in 1976. That detail matters. Most bands try to hide the ugliest night. The Stooges released theirs. You could hear the collapse. You could hear the bottles. You could hear the crowd and the band locked in the same ugly ending. The first life of the Stooges was over. No label had saved them. No critical future had arrived in time. No legend had formed quickly enough to keep the machine alive. The records would be vindicated later, but later was useless to the people inside the wreckage. And Iggy Pop, the man at the center of it, was left standing after a band that had helped invent punk could not survive its own present. But one person had not fully walked away, and that person was David Bowie. Chapter 5. Bowie, Berlin, and the Second Life. After the Stooges collapsed, Iggy Pop did not suddenly become safe. The band was gone. The record deal had failed. The drugs had done damage. And the songs that would later make him look like a prophet had not given him a stable career in the moment he needed one. That is where David Bowie becomes more than a famous name in the story. Bowie had already mixed Raw Power, but in 1977, the connection turned into something bigger. Iggy released The Idiot and Lust for Life, two solo albums tied directly to Bowie's help as producer and co-writer. This was not the Stooges with a new coat of paint. It was a second life. The Idiot was colder, stranger, and more controlled than the records that had made Iggy infamous. Instead of sounding like a band falling down a staircase, it sounded like someone trying to rebuild himself in a locked room. Then came Lust for Life, recorded at Hansa Studio in West Berlin. The title track, Lust for Life, did something almost impossible. It kept Iggy's nerve, but gave it motion. It sounded alive without pretending the past had been cleaned up. And the passenger turned movement itself into a kind of survival. Riding, watching, staying in motion, because stopping might be worse. The numbers were not giant, but they mattered. The Idiot reached number 30 in the United Kingdom. Lust for Life reached number 28. After the Stooges had crashed and burned, Iggy finally had proof that another version of his career could exist. But he did not become a normal pop star. That was never the point. In 1986, Real Wild Child gave him his first hit single in the United States. Then, in 1991, Candy, his duet with Kate Pearson of the B-52s, reached number 28 on the Billboard Hot 100. For a man who had once seemed too strange for the mainstream, that was a strange victory. Not a full surrender, not a makeover. More like the mainstream finally brushing against him and realizing he had been there the whole time. Still, the deeper vindication was not in a solo hit. It was waiting inside the band everyone had once failed to understand. Chapter 6. The Last Original Stooge. The Stooges did not disappear after their first collapse. They waited. For years, the records that had failed in real time kept spreading underground. Bands heard the Stooges, Funhouse, and Raw Power differently than the public had heard them the first time. What once sounded too ugly, too blunt, and too unstable started to sound like a blueprint. Then, in 2003, the Stooges reunited. That should have been the clean victory. The old band finally back on stage. The old songs finally understood. The audience finally ready for what Iggy Pop, Ron Asheton, Scott Asheton, and Dave Alexander had helped create decades earlier. But the story was already missing someone. Dave Alexander had died in 1975, at only 27, from complications from pancreatitis. The original bassist was gone before the world fully caught up to the band he helped start. Then came another blow. In 2009, Ron Asheton died in Ann Arbor of a suspected heart attack. The guitarist who helped make those first records sound so heavy and strange did not live long enough to stand with the band when the biggest official honor finally arrived. In 2010, the Stooges were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Think about that timing. The band that had been too raw for the industry in 1969 was now being placed inside rock's official history. The songs that had once barely sold were now treated like foundation stones. I Wanna Be Your Dog, Search and Destroy, Gimme Danger, and Lust for Life had become part of the language. But recognition does not bring people back. The band played its final show in 2013. 1 year later, in 2014, Scott Asheton died at 64 after an unspecified illness. That left Iggy Pop, the kid from the trailer, the drummer who wanted to be seen, the singer who smeared peanut butter on himself at Cincinnati, the man pelted with bottles at the Michigan Palace. The survivor Bowie helped pull into another life. Of the original Stooges, only he remained. And somehow, he still kept moving. In 2016, he released Post-Pop Depression, made with Josh Homme, Dean Fertitta, and Matt Helders. The album reached number 5 in the United Kingdom and earned a Grammy nomination for Best Alternative Music Album in 2017. Then came the late honors, a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2020, the Polar Music Prize in 2022. The kind of recognition that would have sounded absurd back when the Stooges were being dropped, ignored, and thrown at by their own crowd. But that is the strange shape of Iggy Pop's life. The world did not understand him early enough to save the band. It understood him late enough to turn him into history. And the final image is not an award, a stage dive, or a scar. It is a room.